the simple answer is how do you approach it? You call your lawyer. Before you put your name, if you are a business owner, you got to think through what you've gone through to get that business open.
Hi, I'm Russ, and this is the Memory Makers Podcast, the show that helps you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories. A little Memory Makers Podcast. I know I've used Bruno Mars before for the jingle, but given our guest today, who is a show choir brethren of mine from back in the day, a laser tag game marshal extraordinaire, and also a lawyer. And so I'm very excited for us to be joined. Our guest is none other than Kevin Lonzo of the Lonzo Law Firm. How are you, good sir?
Doing great, and I appreciate that. That's the dual problem of being the lawyer but the show choir guy. Like, you have to have rights to this, but also that's a great jam.
It is a good one. I can't, you put a horn section in it, and I'm a sucker for it every time. We will probably have to do an episode purely dedicated to breaking down our favorite musicals and other show choir and performing arts accoutrements. But main thing that I wanted to focus on for this episode is the day job portion of your passion, which is the Lonzo Law Firm. And just for our guests, if you haven't had a chance to meet Kevin, he is a fantastic human being and an astute lawyer. His firm does business and legal services for businesses and individuals and nonprofit organizations. And he's been practicing for the last 9 years with his own firm with a special focus on the entertainment venue, right? And so we kind of want to look at FECs and legalese and what are some high level things that go into that, but we should probably start with what kind of legal disclaimer do we need about the legal information being discussed today?
I appreciate that. As the lawyer, we always got to make sure when we're going on something like that, or on like this podcast, it's about having an idea that everything we're saying is for learning purposes. Every situation and circumstance is different. So if you do have any questions or anything I say or Russ brings up, just kind of puts a little tickle in your brain that you're like, hey, that might apply to me. Reach out to us. I'm sure at the end or somewhere in there they'll be connected with how you can get a hold of us at Lonzo Law or your local attorney. We are not selfish enough to think we are the only lawyers out there. I don't care who your lawyer is. I just care that you have one. You're willing to talk to them. You like them. They love you back. That is what's important to me. But make sure if there's anything we say that just kind of jostles for you, make sure that you don't just take that as legal advice. This is not supposed to be legal advice. Every circumstance is separate and situational. So check with your lawyer, but hopefully what we say will at least make you think how you can become proactive about your legal needs.
I dig it. Well, thank you. And so talk to me, you go to law school, you're the editor of the law review while you're in school. You started with a bigger firm, but it wasn't necessarily where you felt like the fulfillment and the satisfaction was coming from. What drove you to strike out and hang your shingle and do your own firm, but then focusing on this crazy world of family entertainment?
Well, I went to law school down here at Stetson University and was not the editor, but one of an editor, a notes and comments editor. Don't want to take that title away from our actual editor at the time. But went off and did a lot of fun things where I learned about how to practice law. And what drove me to go out on my own and really focus on the FEC was actually getting a call from an old coworker of mine who was in the FEC world who needed some guidance. And quickly within having a conversation around him, it was clear to see that other lawyers did not necessarily know how to apply what we learned in law school, which is no liability. Liability is bad. We need to eliminate it, to an industry that's built on liability, and that's how you make your money. So having an understanding of how the FEC industry works, how important it is to increase your throughput and do it as safely as possible, was really an approach that I found in the FEC world that was lacking. There's not a lot of lawyers that understand that from the business side. There's plenty of lawyers out there who are willing to do the defense work if somebody gets hurt, or even more so that are willing to sue an FEC if somebody gets hurt, but there's not a lot of people that really understood the business side. So I think having my years of experience as a FEC employee, and then knowing this industry through a lot of friends like yourself and the folks at Creative Works, I found that there was a niche. And then from that point on, it's just kind of grown. I had the pleasure of working with some national brands, and I've had the pleasure of working with some mom and pops who were just, serving their local community. And it's interesting because all of them have similar problems. Sure, they're turned up for the bigger folks, but ultimately the FEC world has a lot of the same problems that are not easily understood when a lawyer says, hey, well, to solve this problem, just get rid of that attraction.
Yeah, all you got to do is.
Yeah. So I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to kind of bring that together. And then to your question about going out on my own, I just really, really enjoy kind of doing things my own way. This firm has been built on trying to do things a different way. I feel like the general larger legal system is somewhat broken, and how it is built both for lawyers and also for clients, it creates a combative relationship. So the shockingly long 9 years that I had not even thought about that I've been open that long. I just graduated. How could that be the case?
I know it slips. Well, with your little ones at home. Well, one little one. Gosh, is he? Little. Yeah, he's teenage years here before we know it. So, yeah. Yikes. Yeah, it flies faster than what we think. But well, so let's dive into that. So 2 areas that I thought would be interesting for us to explore, and you've actually spoken at Amusement 360 on these topics and things. One would be to your earlier point about liability, like what is acceptable risk, knowing that these attractions like you can't have zero liability when it comes to these attractions. Some have more than others. Some surprisingly don't have as much liability as what you would expect in certain circumstances. So let's talk a little bit of that liability. And then the second part that I'd love for us to look at a little bit is like, for growth and scale, like, hey, if we're gonna, take this and duplicate it, there are different vehicles and ways of potentially exploring that. And so first starting with the liability, in my head, there's kind of these 3 big areas that you would have. You'd have, obviously like slip and falls and some of that personal injury kind of stuff that happens with it. But you've also got, in order when you're starting the business, you've got contract stuff that you're trying to do. And then there's also like ongoing business operations with just HR stuff. And so in looking at those, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as far as liability within those 3 areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I often say that I look at the business world in general, but especially in the FECs, that there's 3 buckets of liability, which you have the HR, the employees. Most people forget, you've got some sort of obligations to those folks, and it's not just to make sure that they get their paychecks. You have a duty to be able to make sure that they are acting in accordance with your guys' standards, that they're not getting injured. So you've got that conflict as well. But in the FEC world, it gets even bigger because you have a lot of, under 8 or under minority age employees. So you've got certain work HR concerns you have to deal with that. And then just the general, dating amongst employees, conflicts amongst employees. So you've got one area there that you really got to watch out for. The second bucket, obviously, is the slip and falls. That's your, somebody slips on a soda, somebody's running around in the arena, somebody runs their go-kart into a wall. What happens next? And then the third bucket, obviously, is the contracts and formation. I kind of bunch those together. Russ, you mentioned at the beginning, honestly, you're going to have contracts throughout. You've got renewals that come up, and there's a lot of different contracts in this industry that can get you in trouble quick, whether or not it's a lease that seems to be predatory, or one of the vendors out there that's providing some of your needs, having you set up with something that's like a 5-year contract with an auto renewal. There's a lot of ways that you can get yourself sideways with liability issues, because you're giving yourself you're making yourself exposed to potential lawsuits or claims brought against you or your insurance company. Well,
and you always have had this mindset of people need to be a lot more proactive in getting out ahead of these things before it's an issue. And it doesn't take a lot of heavy lifting. And that's easy for me from the person that doesn't do it. But it doesn't necessarily require, a full Supreme Court hearing to make sure that we've got basic ducks in a row that are going to help us avoid issues or just be in a better position should an issue arise.
Absolutely.
What are some of those, when you look at something like on the personal injury, and litigation kind of stuff, are there some high level examples of here's how to be a little bit more proactive on that front, whether that's through the use of waivers or, anything along those lines? Like, what are some good housekeeping things to consider potentially when it comes to that bucket?
Number one is having the right team. And I would expect most people to, have an accountant, most people to have their insurance company set up. If you don't, make sure you've got those. But part of that also is having the right legal team set up for you. People really have this ick when it comes to dealing with lawyers, which I understand. I'm a lawyer. I hate us. We're not the best. We're wet blankets, but our part of that is the idea that we're sitting here thinking the worst case scenario to try and protect our clients. But there's this feeling that most folks can't afford a lawyer. And you guys just have to be proactive to go and consult with somebody. There's all sorts of programs out there. We have one, we created our world around memberships. People are starting to do it differently. So there's ways to be able to get somebody to advise you. And that should be being advised on a waiver. Some folks are like, I've got a waiver. I got it through my POS system. And at the bottom of the waiver, it clearly states, have your lawyer review this. We're not lawyers, but folks will just slap that on there and leave that on. And it's one of those things where it's just like, hey, take those extra steps. So having that team set up to make sure that you guys are protected, both with anything from a walkthrough. I still remember a time when I did a walkthrough of a place down in Florida and was just kind of looking at it from a different perspective than they were as they were doing their final walkthrough. They're looking to see if everything looks good, trying to see, if kids are going to enjoy themselves. I'm looking for, hey, where's somebody going to get hurt? And came up to this homemade light bright system, super cool looking little case right up against the wall, meant for toddlers. And I kind of just pulled back on it and the whole thing just came flying down on me. And it was probably about 200 pounds. And I'm sitting there thinking, I didn't use that much pressure. And this thing would have squashed a kid. And just thinking through like, hey, this was a problem. Being able to point that out in a way that they were just looking at it and playing with it to make sure that it worked. So having somebody that can take that view, that's not just thinking, hey, is this pretty? Hey, did we meet our deadlines? Hey, are we open ready? It's, hey, how can we keep this safe? So aligning things along that, making sure you've got policies and procedures for cleanups. I spent one of my times at a firm that was representing a large retailer, and some of that stuff is just having the right policies and procedures for avoiding the incidents and taking the time to really train your team. Proper training saves a lot of incidents. And then knowing what to do if an incident occurs. How do you, take an incident report? How do you make sure you don't have a young employee that goes, oh, that was our fault, and now you've admitted liability? So creating those proactive steps take a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of money, but the old adage I use is like, it's going to cost you 3 times as much and take you twice as long for me to fix your mistake than it would be if you would just be proactive about it and try to invest in that early.
Well, and you had mentioned as well on the accounting and the insurance side, and like it is really important for those entities and people of that team to have a good understanding too, because yes, like, Rand, who we love on the insurance side with his group and everything, like he's found contracts that say, that like for a go-kart facility that their insurance policy was excluding go-karts. And so then he was like, your previous underwriter, like this, you're not covered with this. But it's also, being able to then say, okay, if an incident does happen, like your insurance person is going to have, better rates and have your back more when they know you've got processes documented. How are we taking incident reports? How are we training on all of this? And so it's like, that's something that lives in both of those worlds in order to make sure that like we've done the due diligence and the proper steps ahead of time. And we consistently train and reinforce. We've got our checklist, like all of that stuff, because if something does happen, you can also then, I'd imagine, when you're, whether it's an arbitration or it's an initial review or a conversation between you and a party's attorney themselves, like, hey, this is not, the picture quite that I'm seeing based on how all of these other preliminary steps and proactive, nature of their business is taking place.
Absolutely. Ultimately, a lot of the times what's claimed is, it's a reasonableness standard. You don't have the video. You don't have the exact circumstance. What you have is the history showing we took these steps. This is what we do. Here's our cleaning log that shows we've been doing this every hour on the hour. So the fact of, we missed a spill, well, that means that happened within this period of time, which wouldn't be reasonable to do that more. You can't just have a person just walking around at all times, their only job being to look at the floor in this 10 by 10 area.
Yeah.
So establishing that really helps. And to your point, like, we all work hand in hand in the sandbox. Like Rand and other insurance companies will call me and say, hey, listen, I got this new client. They need a waiver, because they know that it's really important that their clients have the waiver. It's not a silver bullet, doesn't fix everything, but having a waiver that is written by an attorney that understands the industry, rather than somebody that does divorce law on the side and they just them, so you go and have them write you a waiver. It's very different. So making sure that you have the right people that know the industry and know you is super important. And then making sure that they all know each other and work together, because their jobs are all to support you as an FEC owner.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about some of the contracts, obviously, whether it's, employment contracts but whether it's your lease or your land use, or, even just, hey, we're going to do a temporary beer and wine license for a corporate event that we're doing, and we don't normally carry that. Like, there's a whole slew of stuff that can kind of come up when it comes to those kinds of things. And again, if we're thinking about things from a proactive approach, I'd imagine one of the first things that you look at, like for that temporary liquor license or alcohol license or something, would be, hey, because my wife is currently doing this with the 4-H association here at, where we live in Madison County, where it's like, hey, we think we want to use this space for like wedding events and other things. Like, okay, we need to have some conversations with the insurance company and see what they're okay with and how does that start to go. And then we have to talk to the lawyers and see like, what is the state, how does the state bumper lane certain aspects, but then, what do you have to have the entire property shut down and nobody else can use it? Like, where and how do we start to thread this needle where, hey, giving a call to you or their lawyer when they're thinking of going down that path, just to make sure that you're thinking of things, because unfortunately, you've had experience where people go into these situations and they think they've got a handshake deal or they've been given a verbal thumbs up, and it's like, but if something were to happen and it gets misconstrued, like, it's really easy for that to be a house of cards if you're not planned for it.
Yeah, and again, to your point, like, the simple answer is how do you approach it? You call your lawyer. Before you put your name, if you are a business owner, you got to think through what you've gone through to get that business open. Either the amount of money you've invested or the amount of loans you've taken out, the time you've spent creating this concept and this idea can all just fall because of a contract that you sign. Because the second you put your name to it, doesn't matter what was said before, it doesn't matter what they're telling you the intention is, that document matters. Now, contracts is a course that in law school, just the opening of contracts, like the starter contracts 101 is a course that is a 3 to 4 hour course at all law schools, requirement to take for passing the bar in every state. You got to understand how contracts are, because there is, as you mentioned, legalese, and there are words in there that I know people who have graduated law school that don't know the definition of things, like indemnification. Like, that's a fancy word that has a whole lot of meaning that folks don't necessarily understand, and they'll say, oh no, it's fine. And then somebody will say, well, what's this mean? And they'll say, oh no, that just covers instances where you do something wrong. Well, if it specifically states, you shall, as the person who's signing this contract, indemnify the manufacturer, that can get you sideways if the manufacturer does something wrong, because the definition of that is to stand in the place of. So I have an instance where like there was a refurbished fair ride that a client of mine wanted to buy, and the contract, it's a 1.5-page contract. My contract, it's fine, it's simple. They just want to make sure. Specifically stated, you as the buyer shall indemnify us as the seller against any and all claims, regardless of even if it's our own negligence. So that's basically the contractor or the person who's selling it saying, hey, we don't actually believe that we did a good job, and if somebody gets hurt because of something we did and they sue us, you're going to stand in our place.
Yeah.
And that's written that way because as lawyers, we're told make it the best contract for our clients as possible. Again, not necessarily something I fully agree with in terms of how the legal industry approaches things. Like,
sure,
you're doing business, let's do right, good for the goose, good for the gander. But a lot of the lawyers are taking the approach that says, hey, I've got to write this in the absolute best. I've got to zealously advocate. So I want them covered for everything. And if you don't push back and say, I'm not signing this if it doesn't get changed, take that situation, extrapolate, somebody gets, catastrophically injured, that's your business. That's that thing you built, gone. Because your insurance will cover you up to a certain point, but they might have riders, like you said, that say, hey, we won't cover you for indemnification. They might have situations where we only cover you up to a certain amount and you don't have enough insurance. If you don't have enough insurance, anything that somebody gets a reward for, they can go above that from you personally and your business.
Yeah.
Or heavens forbid, if you get to a situation where you're not properly like set up as a business or an entity with your state and you haven't created that LLC, that's something you need to talk and work with your accountant and your lawyer on, because I've had people that have told me, hey, don't worry, I've got an LLC, and they show me that they've got signed up for a fictitious business name. Those are not the same.
Right.
And in doing so, they've now created a situation where they personally would be liable, not just their entity. There's a lot of ways that it can get tricky and get sideways, where it's just easier just to go forward and find somebody that says, hey, this is what you are an expert in. And I want to trust you to be able to help me with it, because if I mess up, you come after me.
Yeah.
I've got insurance for that. That's what we're here for. If you as an owner mess up, it's your own. You got nobody to point the finger at. So it's very important if you are signing anything, and I don't care if it's a contract for dishes and, linens, or if it's you're buying a $750,000 piece of equipment, anything you put your name to, you should ask your lawyer. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can just be hey, what's your choice? Like, what's this like?
Right. Well, and it's been, I mean, even with with our clients, if they want to have, hey, like we've got some red lines or we've got some things in this contract that we don't like, it's like, great, let's set up a phone call with your lawyer and our lawyer, so that way they can get down to some of the brass tacks, because there are times where, and it's not the end of the world, but like you have a client that says, well, I want this taken out. And it's like, well, this clause is specifically allocated towards international clients and doesn't apply to you. Like, okay, sure. But sometimes just having a 15 or a 30-minute piece of, hey, here are the red lines that we want to have. Great. We'll have our attorney look at it ahead of time, so that way everybody can come to the table and quickly go, oh, okay, well, here's, the purpose and intent of this clause is this. So yes, we could modify it to, to be a little bit more specific for your circumstance, since that's slightly different. Like, it helps just contextualize some of that stuff. But also, if there is an indemnification question of, okay, well, we can't do that because of X, Y, or Z. Okay, well then what are our next steps or options? So that way, again, we're just at a spot where everybody feels comfortable and confident with how it's set up. But at least in my muggle experience with being on some of these calls, like with you or in those types of situations, like the vast majority of the time, I've never had it be a combative experience, and it's much more of just, okay, great. How do we navigate this? What are your main concerns with it? Why don't you like it the way that it's written? Okay, sure. Like, here's something that we think gets us all to a place that we need to be. And sometimes it's just having like, okay, certain things that we need to specify within that clause. So that way, again, there's more context to it should it get there. Or even looking at things of like, hey, if there is something that comes up that needs to get resolved, like, let's do arbitration because that's much less costly. It's much easier for everybody to do. It's, it gets us to a clean, healthy result faster, with it. And so it's just talking through that kind of stuff, and not to say that there aren't combative elements out there, but at least my experience with working with you in the past, it's like, if it gets to that point, like, it's because there were things that weren't done on the front end just to have these quick conversations that can put a lot of that to bed.
Yeah, honestly, it's the proactiveness of it, because what you're talking about is you get to the place if you're comfortable. I had a situation just yesterday where I was talking to a client, and we had an issue with an indemnification clause with somebody, and I said, this needs to change. And what got sent back to us was, no, we don't change our standard language. And what that did for me was gave me the option to go to my client and say, if they truly are not willing to do this, you need to know what type of business partner they will be. Because what I am asking them for in this situation is to exclude certain situations, one of which was their own, like, willful misconduct or intentional actions. They can't walk into your facility and light a match and say, let it burn, and you indemnify me. Which, if the language is not right, it's an extreme situation and there'd be criminal charges and all of that, but the business you would not have a remedy. And so I'm sitting there, I'm saying, if they're willing to not do that, we need to know it. So then we got on the phone with their lawyer and just had a conversation. I said, listen, I need these 3 things covered, because my client would have no say in. They have no way to change this. And if you can give me those and exclude them, then we can probably move forward. But if not, then I got to go to my client and tell them that I don't think I'd want to do business with somebody that isn't willing to take responsibility of the things that they are solely in control of.
Yeah.
And when you phrase it that way, that's a 2-minute blurb. All of a sudden, my client knows, hey, if they're not willing to agree to this, is this really somebody that wants to do business in an equal footing, or in a way that they want to do business with us? And 2, are they somebody that's willing to take responsibility? And that could have been a 12-day red line back and forth. What do you mean you won't accept it? That's unacceptable. Knocked it out in a 10-15-minute phone call.
Yeah.
And that's the proactiveness of it. And now we will never have that be a problem, because we did the thing up front.
Set it up. Quickly, just wanted to touch on, if we've got a little bit of time, we have a lot of customers that when we're talking with them, they may have an existing business and they're looking to duplicate that and set it up. There are, and we'll probably do a whole separate piece on the growing and scaling side of things, because it is a deep well to pull from as well. So we'll get that in there. But what are, for folks that are looking at potentially growing or scaling their business, can you give them a couple of high level food for thought type questions of, hey, there are typically a couple of ways to do this. Here are some of these high-level questions that you consider, and depending on the answers to those, one model versus another may kind of lend itself a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes to me a lot with my FEC clients. They'll come to me and say, hey, so-and-so just walked into my facility that's been open for a month, and they want to know if they can open one. And they want to know if they can expand, and where are we going? Are you opening one on the north side? And that is the dream for all of us, more likely than not, as business owners, is to be able to say, hey, I'm taking this thing, I created it in a way that is so cool that somebody else either wants to replicate it or wants there to be more of them to be able to have better access. And what I always tell my clients when they come to me with that is there's really 3 different ways you can do that. You can either expand on your own as you were the person that started this thing, you created this thing, you opened it, you operate it. Now you go and you do another one and you backfill with a good general manager that can stay in this space, and then you go create a new one. And that's a way that you can have total control of the business, all the decisions made. It just means you don't have a lot of time. You can bring on investors to help with that. You can bring on partners, but ultimately that's the route where you keep total control of everything and you run everything, and you get all of the dollars that come from that concept you created. It is exhausting, but also fulfilling. And the teams that do that usually have a really great team of employees around them, and they build a team that they know can run the place, so that as they grow, your general manager becomes your, regional manager becomes your national manager. Then there's the approach where you create a really cool concept that's unique and special, and people are like, I want to open one. Then they always talk about franchising, and that is a way of growing. And I always like to tell people, like, franchising is the best way to compound your idea, because you can have a whole bunch of people that are using their time to do it and you get a percentage of it. But there's a lot of investment of time and energy that goes into that. You know, the cost to be able to start a franchise, there's a lot of federal and state laws and varying state laws that determine whether or not you can franchise and how you can franchise, and the steps you have to take to protect what the government calls the consumers, which is going to be the people that want to be franchisees.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of layers to that, but it's definitely the highest potential earner, because you are now tapping people to make you money. And then people who want to avoid that want to do something sort of like that, which is licensing, which is a great way to do things. You can license out your concept, you can license out your name, your logo, anything that you can put a protective mark around, and those work really well. But do that with the right legal team to make sure, one, you've got a licensing agreement that works, and two, you're not really just pretending to be a franchise without having to do all the other stuff. Walks
fair.
like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck, and that's the way that they approach that. And licensing is a great idea if you do it the right way, to be able to not have that heavy investment. But the number one thing you have to understand with licensing is you can't tell them how to operate. You can tell them how to use the mark, you can tell them how to use the name and put parameters around that. However, if they run it into the ground or create a bad name, you are risking your brand, you are risking your business you built and the concept you built. Because unlike in franchising, where you can say, you have to buy from this place, you have to use this equipment, you have to operate this way, it is very different. You say, here, use this, here's the color scheme you can use, here's where you can run it. But if they decide to do the business side of things cheaply or poorly, there's no consequences for that. So those are really the three main ways that people will expand, is either through that franchising, through just expanding on their own with themselves or partners, or licensing a concept out to say, hey, I created an idea, I got a great name, here, you can go use it. I'm going to make some mailbox money every year because you get the right to be able to use the name, and I don't care how you operate it, or, hey, I trust you.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, we'll definitely, let's get something on the books for us to dive in a little bit deeper with that too, just because there's a lot of nuance obviously that goes into all of that, because we see so many folks looking, to your point of, hey, if we want to be more of a force for good out there and create more memories, that's certainly something that is a way of, sometimes you don't get to just buy the spot next to you or lease the spot next to you to grow that business. Sometimes it's, okay, we need a fully separate location, and how do we actually set that up so that way it doesn't jeopardize this business, like all of that fun stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. Creating a concept and then not cannibalizing yourself is one of the hardest things to be able to figure out the way to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Before I let you go, any favorite either audiobook or podcasts or anything like that you've come across recently that you've really been enjoying? And I'll even open that up to musical theater shows.
If we're talking musical theater, it's an old one, but Hadestown has been fantastic. I really am enjoying that one coming out.
Nice.
Everybody's talking about the movie. I am nerding out a couple chapters into Project Hail Mary on the audiobook.
Nice.
Very enjoyable. I'm watching that or reading that before I go to go see it in theaters, and that has been a good chuckle and well written so far. That's my
fabulous.
That's
on my short list. I have not. So Danny has read it and has swooned over it, and so it's next on my list for sure. Yeah, but I'm never going to be mad about following that up with a little Ryan Gosling action in the theaters. So.
Exactly. You gotta. As they're describing it, I'm just imagining Ryan Gosling as the character. So
there you go. I love it. Well, thank you, Kevin, so much for your time and your insights on this. I always love the chance to get to nerd out with you and just appreciate who you are and how you show show up for folks. Thank you all for joining us. And if you like what you heard, we will always appreciate those 5-star reviews if we've earned it. If you have ideas for additional topics on podcasts and things, hit us up on social media. Mike is always checking out the comments, making sure that we've got that. We'll also make sure to have a link to Lonzo Law so that way you guys can check out Kevin and his team. Kevin is, like I said, a beautiful human being. And so if it's a thing where either he can help you or he's got somebody in the Rolodex to be able to help you, they can tackle that with gusto for you. And like we've got things like Amusement 360 coming up, and so be sure to check out the event for that, where again, if these are the types of questions that you've got coming up, that's a great event to be able to learn more from and be able to grow and develop the business into the fully realized vision of everything. And shout out to Mikey Mike for working the Ultranet and the 1s and 2s and getting the new studio configuration set up. I feel so spoiled. And we appreciate you all so much, and we'll catch you on the next one, Troublemakers.